All right, we already did a video on Justify about a week after he won his debut race with that 104 Beyer first time out. It was a very impressive performance. We covered that. He come back to run yesterday at Santa Anita. He had another excellent performance. He won by 6.5 lengths. Mike Smith had him under a full Nelson hold. Never really asked him to run. He had his ears up. Kind of geared down at the wire. The race got a big number. Um, we'll take a look at yesterday's race more in depth here. But before we do that, I kind of wanted to see if we could find a comparison for Justify. I mean, there's very, very few horses that are, through my 25 years following the sport that really fit. That would justify making a comparison to Justify. The horse I have here, Rock Hard 10, is a horse who I think would make a comparison. They both debuted at 7 furlongs in February at Santa Anita. Rock Hard 10 was an absolutely gigantic horse. I mean, he was 17-3. Just enormous. Every time Tom Durkin called, I mean, he would call a race. He'd make 2 or 3 calls during the course of the race about, just the size of Rock Hard 10. He'd say Rock Hard 10's uncoiling his stride. And, just a very big horse, which, Justify happens to be too. Justify's a big muscle-bound horse. Anyway, Rock Hard 10 won his debut first time out in February. He won under a hand ride. The race got a big number. He come back in a mile, a little less impressive in both races, but I mean, this is Santa Anita. You see 7 furlongs to a mile, basically the same time of year. So I thought Rock Hard 10 was a reasonable horse to compare to Justify. Maybe a cut or touch below, but and this horse was actually trained by a Canadian guy named Jason Orman, who certainly know Bob Baffert as a trainer. Rock Hard 10 ended up having a good career. He eventually got transferred to Dick Mandella's barn, and he didn't lose a race for Mandella. He won the Malibu at 7 furlongs, a grade 1 over Lava Man, I believe, was third in that race. He won the Big Cap at 1.25 miles over St. Liam, who was that year's Horse of the Year. And Rock Hard 10 was going to be the second choice in the Breeders' Cup Classic to St. Liam, but extremely rare that you see a horse debut at 7 furlongs first time out, run a triple-digit Beyer. Like I said, I mean, these are the only horses, just digging and digging who I could remember who did this. Then you've got Pulpit is probably more of a fair comparison. The numbers are a little better on Pulpit, although in the late 90s, the Beyer figures tend to be, a few points higher than they are today. I mean, grade 1 today, if you look at pars, they were about 3 or 4 points faster across the board in the late 90s. So, Pulpit was a sensation. He won at Gulfstream Park first time out by 7.5, beat a good horse and powerful goer. Came back and won without really being asked in his second start. But he was another horse. He debuted as a 3-year-old at 7 furlongs. Come back in a rout the next time. So he'd be another what they would call Apollo curse horse. And Pulpit run 4th in the Kentucky Derby and never raced again after that. That's basically the after career to where we're going here. But then you go to Curlin, obviously. He's a very well-known horse. He won his debut at 7 in February at Gulfstream, 12 3/4. Got that 102 number. Instead of trying an allowance race like you see with the rest of these, Steve Asmussen actually bought this horse privately from Helen Pitts, made for Stone Street. I think Padua Stables was in on it. There was a group in on it. Midnight Cry was the ownership down here. But, Curlin, extremely impressive, even though his figure, went backwards 3 points. To go wire to wire in your debut at 7, then step up into grade 3, was taken off the pace, just swept clear, got a good number. He didn't win the Kentucky Derby, but he did win the Preakness, and he did win the Breeders' Cup Classic as a 3-year-old. Kojan, this horse I think is, he won his debut with 102 Beyer. He came at 7 furlongs as an early 3-year-old. Came back and ran a mile. Won by 12 3/4. Never ran again. This horse never competed again the rest of his career after the second start here. He had an injury and he was kind of quietly retired to stud. He won that second race under a full Nelson, too, with his ears up. The race didn't get quite the number, but, I wasn't trying to pick out comparisons that were flattering or unflattering, just trying to find horses who really fit the profile of what Justify has done. Some were horses that are well recognized today to even casual fans like Pulpit and Curlin, and some horses, like a Kojan or a Rock Hard 10 would be, the two others who, Rock Hard 10 was an outstanding horse. Kojan just never ran again. So, like I said, I'm not trying to elevate Justify. I'm not trying to knock him. All I'm trying to do is find horses who on paper are very, very similar to what he's done. And it's hard to do because he's done, you just don't see, horses debut at 7 furlongs and run a big number. And, it's just, he's a very rare talent. So, and I had to find a Baffert horse here because, these 4 horses aren't Baffert. So kind of the closest comparison I would have would be Bayern. He debuted at 7 furlongs, January of his 3-year-old season. Won with a 92 Beyer, which was the highest debut Beyer by any first or 3-year-old firster at 7 that year in 2014. So, he was fastest of the year at the distance for debuters. Come back, and he actually won by 15 lengths, ridden out second time. 135 3, just like Justify. You look here, 22 1, 21 4, 135 3, 135 3. The Beyers are higher for Justify, indicating that the tracks were a little quicker when Bayern ran it. But Bayern was a horse who he got beat in the Arkansas Derby third time out. He actually, I think he might have missed it. He might have missed a workout or something. Something kept him. He didn't run until the Arkansas Derby. He got beat there. He came back in the Derby trial. Baffert, didn't have the points. I don't think. Skipped the. I don't know if it was points or money back then, but he did run in the Preakness. He did not run well in the Preakness, but he eventually ended up winning the Breeders' Cup Classic as a 3-year-old. So, it's not like comparing Bayern as some great stain on Justify. Bayern was a nice horse, but these are very, very hard to find comps, very hard to find comparisons for Justify. But these 5 horses are the best I could do. Through all my time watching racing, I would say that these would be, your only real comparisons for this horse. There aren't any horses who I would say are, these are the best of the bunch, and he fits right with them. So, some of them went on to do great things. Curlin, Pulpit kind of more or less did great things as a sire. He's a sire at Tappan, was a great sire and everything. Curlin's the best horse of this bunch. Pulpit, a great sire. Rock Hard 10, people probably forget how good he is, but he was a damn good horse. If Mandela, he wasn't beaten with Mandela. He beat some good horses. Won the Big Cap over St. Liam with Mandela. beat Lava Man. So, I mean, this horse here would kind of be the the stain, the stain of the bunch, just because he never ran again. But who knows? Maybe Kojan, Kojan was cut out just like Justify to be something special. But they're like they say with strawberries, they can go bad overnight. So there is your comparison for Justify. With that said, we're going to take a look at his race yesterday. Okay, before we watch the race, I just thought I'd show this because it kind of gives you an idea just how big a horse Justify is. Thoroughbred racing's kind of taken a page out of greyhound racing now, and at some tracks, I think the Stronach tracks especially, they're weighing the horses before the race. And you can see Justify tipped the scales at 1,258 pounds. He was the biggest horse in the race by almost 100 pounds. He weighed 254 pounds more than the horse breaking to his inside, Tap Fever. So this is an extremely heavy horse, and he has just got tremendous muscle tone on him. I mean, if you ever see a picture of Justify, he's very well muscled out. This is a big, muscular chestnut horse. So there is. I just figured I'd show that before we get into the race. Okay, and one final sort of tidbit I wanted to show is before we watch the race is Justify's final work for this. This was this was March 5th, so it was 6 days before yesterday's race. And you see he's on the outside here. This is Justify on the outside. He's working in company with Nero. Nero was second in the Grade 2 San Vicente last time. So, I mean, people talk about how, how this horse, isn't tested. Well, he is kind of tested in the morning. I mean, this is a horse that was second in a Grade 2 last time. He's heads up looking him in the eye. So, I mean, that's where it's kind of different with Baffert. Baffert's more aggressive trainer in the morning, and he's not afraid to pair up a horse, like Justify with, accomplished stakes horse. Anyway, you see Justify going extremely well here on the outside. This is a very nice work, for a horse that just just has one start in him, outworking a horse who was second in a Grade 2 last time. And he's just going to have a huge gallop out here, you'll see. So I just thought I'd show that to, kind of illustrate that, yeah, the horse is not necessarily tested on form and hasn't been tested in his races, but, Bob Baffert, he tests them in the morning, we'll say that. Okay, they're loading in. Justify is the 8 horse here. He broke a tad slow, as the past performance is noted, but he's in a great spot here. He's out here in the clear. Mike Smith mentioned that he just tucked him in briefly to get his face a little dirty. He wanted to, just very briefly allow Justify the chance to take some kickback in his face, and it was slop. So you can't say the horse has never had dirt in his face. Although watching the head-on replay, he didn't take much kickback. Smith just gave him a tiny little taste of it. So I guess you can check that box of having a little bit of mud in his eye, but. So he didn't keep his face clean when he could have. But here you see, Justify is just looming up here. This horse in the lead was actually entered in the San Felipe over the weekend in scratch. Justify just went by him with disdainful ease here. Smith really hasn't asked. Very impressive move off a 22-2 first quarter, 45 flat half around the turn. I mean, you see, Smith isn't asking for anything. Justifies, his ears are kind of pricked. You'd see it if the camera was a little less grainy, but and now it kind of froze on us. But there's Justify, just, cruising with his ears pricked. Could have done more. I mean, I'm not a big believer that, hitting a horse makes him run much faster. But when you see the horse's, ears pricked going back and forth, it's a good indication that, he's just basically waiting on his cue. So in this race, wasn't a plan for Baffert. It was kind of a last-minute thing. So very impressive performance. One thing I'll say that's kind of surprised me is that the hype may be just getting out of control just because of the Baffert factor. I mean, to be the favorite in the Kentucky Derby future pool over horses like McKenzie and Bolt d'Oro, off these two races, that's surprising to me, and I don't think it's justified to use a play on the name. I mean, this horse has to get the point. I mean, he could win like Rock Hard 10 did. The first horse we showed in the comparison, Rock Hard 10 got disqualified in the Santa Anita Derby in a race where he needed to get the points. I mean, a lot of things could go wrong, and I have no problem with anyone who thinks Justify is the best horse long term of these horses. Come November, I wouldn't bet my lungs, but I would, damn sure feel confident betting that Justify is the best horse in this crop come November. But, to be the best horse in, the first Saturday in May, which is coming up fast, at 1.25 miles, no 2-year-old foundation. I mean, he definitely can do it. I don't know if he should be a shorter price than, Bolt d'Oro and McKenzie. In fact, I don't think he should be, but extremely talented horse. If on Twitter, I had him as my number 3 ranked prospect. So that is Justify. Second start, like I said, we did a video on him first time. I thought I'd, show this race though. So there it is.